President Trump's war of choice with Iran and Pete Hegseth's dysfunctional Pentagon leadership are raising new concerns about the safety of U.S. service members. Former Navy commanders tell MSNL they worry about the high levels of wear and tear on American aircraft carriers, some of which have broken modern-day records for deployment length. They point to the catapults that launch fighter jets and the gear that catches them when they land on the floating runways, all of which have been used extensively over nearly 6 months of fast-paced and unplanned warfare. One retired Navy captain saying, quote, "We are excessively wearing out our ships. The longer that you're working them hard at sea, the more the Navy needs to invest time into maintenance." The Navy did not respond to MSNL's request for comment about delayed maintenance on those ships. I'm going to bring in MSNL Pentagon reporter Priya Sridhar, who broke that story. Ned Price, Mitch Landrieu are still with us. Priya, you've reported on problems with the USS Lincoln, but experts say this kind of maintenance debt has a domino effect. What are they telling you?
Yeah, that's right, Alicia. Well, typically when an aircraft carrier comes back to the United States, it goes into the docks for a maintenance period, which is usually around 7 to 8 months. But because we've seen so many aircraft carriers double the length of their deployments from what's usually about 6 to 7 months to as long as 12 months, it makes sense then that maintenance period then can get extended to a year or a year and a half. And in addition to that, specifically with the Lincoln, we saw it go at sea for 208 continuous days without a port call, which meant that when an aircraft carrier pulls into port, it allows mechanics and engineers and contractors to come on the ship and address different maintenance issues that could come up. So all of that combined together is creating a potential for extreme danger and safety issues, because when you're talking about those catapults and those arresting gears, I mean, if something were to go wrong there, it could lead potentially to a deadly accident, Alicia.
You know, Mitch Landrieu, Priya and I were on earlier this week. We were talking with Amy McGrath, and she reminded us this is not about the members of the armed services needing to be coddled. It is not specifically about a ship itself. It is about clear leadership from both the commander-in-chief and the person who leads DOD. I want you to take a listen to what Senator Mark Kelly said about the president's leadership.
He took our country to war without a strategic goal, without a plan. Now he has no way out of this, and he's stuck. And this has been bungled right from the beginning. And he's got a Secretary of Defense who has no idea what he's doing. I think the most incompetent Secretary of Defense that we've ever had in our history. And the American people are suffering because of this. We also have 18 dead Americans, for no reason.
Mitch, how would you describe the leadership that is coming from the White House and from the Pentagon right now?
Well, again, as Pete Hegseth's words would use, war fighters actually know how to prosecute a war. And obviously, this is just a complete disaster. First of all, the president promised people that he was going to end the war in Ukraine on day one and stay out of foreign wars. Instead, the war in Ukraine is just blowing and going. And of course, he started this war of choice, and he did it in a way that was not planned well. He picked Pete Hegseth, who was incompetent, to be the head of this war effort. And what did Pete Hegseth do the other day? Was he doing something to fix this particular problem? No, he was campaigning as Secretary of Defense. We haven't seen this in our lifetime. He was campaigning in Iowa rather than taking care of his quote unquote war fighters. So again, this is an indication that the president has lost focus, that his leadership, it can't be called that, is just high incompetence. And they have basically bungled what was a war of choice, and they didn't even prosecute well because they didn't plan well for it. It all goes back to the president. So if a president's reckless, if he cares more about ballrooms and bombs, if he can't even prosecute a war and he's not taking care of the American people, what the hell is he doing? So it is a mel of a hess, as we like to say down here on the bayou.
Part of what has become so notable is the fact that you have family of sailors, of Marines aboard the Lincoln who've been increasingly voicing their concerns to the press and the Pentagon. I want to play for all of you some of what the family of one sailor told the New York Times. It starts with her mom and then her husband.
I keep hearing, well, they signed up for this. They didn't sign up to be on a ship in the middle of the ocean with no port calls, no feet on the ground. That wasn't in the brochure when they signed up.
She's been struggling. I think the only thing that helps her is when she gets videos from me of the boys. That brings her spirits up.
To infinity and beyond.
She recorded this for the boys while she's on deployment because she misses them so much. I haven't gotten as much sleep because I have been nervous about her. And I'm also nervous about the boys because I don't have my partner here to help me with them.
These conditions, what do they mean for morale? What do they mean for recruitment? And then in some, what do they mean for our national security?
Well, look, there's a cost, there's a toll that's incurred by these warships, and we've seen some of the conditions aboard them. But yes, we have to be most concerned with the mental health, with the physical, with the safety concerns that our men and women in uniform face every single day. These are people who signed up for sacrifice. They're no stranger to sacrifice. But these are individuals who, by and large, want to know that their sacrifice are being made in service of the United States, of our national security, of our foreign policy, of the safety, security, well-being, health, and prosperity of every single American. And it's really hard, if not impossible, to make that case right now, which I think is also sapping morale. Look, one can argue if there was ever any strategy associated with this misadventure in Iran. I would make that case. I don't think there was ever a real strategy tethered to it. But if there ever was one, we've moved past the strategy phase now, and now we're at the phase of throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. And just last night, to the point of what we're asking our sailors, airmen, and Marines to fight for, President Trump said it's now about economic pressure, maximum economic pressure. Okay, well, you know what his strategy in his first term against Iran was called? Maximum pressure. We have tried this before. It did not work the first time. If it's going to work this time, there are two problems standing in the way. One is the UAE, and the other is China. This president, I don't think, will be willing to ask the UAE that has provided sweetheart deals to him, to his family, to his friends, to make the kind of economic sacrifices they'll have to do. And with President Xi of China coming to the United States on September 24th, a relationship the president wants to keep at equilibrium for the American economy and in turn for his poll numbers, most importantly, I don't think he wants to upset that either. So it goes back to the question of what's our strategy? How are we going to pull our service members out of this with anything in return?
And who has input into that strategy? Pete Hegseth's wife, Jennifer Hegseth, is attracting attention for her unusually active role in the Pentagon. You have the New York Times reporting she is his most influential advisor and his de facto producer at the Pentagon. She has prepped him for appearances, sat in on his meetings with journalists, interviewed potential members of his staff, and brainstormed ideas for the Defense Department videos he and sometimes she appears in. She also sits in highly sensitive intelligence meetings. That's according to reports, which has made allies incredibly uncomfortable. I wonder, Priya, what you were hearing from inside the Pentagon.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is incredibly hypocritical because Secretary of Defense Hegseth kicked out most of the press corps because he was saying that we were wandering around the halls trying to get access to classified information. Yet you're seeing his wife be privy to very sensitive information when it comes to military operations. So I think his logic just doesn't apply when it's not convenient for him. And I think that is what's most upsetting to most people, journalists, I should say, that work inside of the Pentagon specifically, is that if we're not allowed to go inside because we're supposedly trying to solicit classified information from people, then why is someone who doesn't have a national security background, doesn't have a security clearance, sitting in on these extremely important meetings?
Mitch, I mean, it happens at the same time that the longtime publisher of the military newspaper Stars and Stripes is retiring due to clashes with the Pentagon over coverage. In a memo seen by the Associated Press, Max Lederer Jr. wrote that it had, quote, become clear that my philosophy of leadership and my understanding of the value and mission of Stars and Stripes differ in fundamental ways from the direction of the leadership of the Department of Defense has for the organization. What does that tell you, Mitch Landrieu, about what is happening at the Pentagon?
Well, again, he's basically destroying the Pentagon and its top leadership. If you put the pictures up of all of the warfighters that he has fired for some strange reason, which have had, I mean, years and years and years of incredible experience, and now he's relying on people who just happen to be personally close to him to give him information about how to fight a war that he wasn't prepared to fight. I mean, it's just, it should make everybody in America weep. I mean, it's one of the reasons why they basically drove the car off into a ditch and they don't know what to do. He doesn't have the most competent people around him, all the while he's complaining about DEI. He's not running an organization based on merit. But again, it all goes back to the president. The president of the United States put Pete Hegseth there. The president of the United States has given him the run. The president of the United States allowed him to go to Iowa. So the fish rots from the head. The buck stops at Donald Trump's office. He is too busy on the helipad and the ballrooms to focus on what really matters to the security of the American people. And he's lost focus about reducing people's costs, which is the reason they said they elected him. And they're pissed And I think they're going to deliver a blow to him in 76 days or so.
And why he keeps claiming that magically oil prices are going to be the lowest you have ever seen. You just keep waiting. Mitch Landrieu, Priya Sridhar, Ned Price, thank you all so much for getting us started.
Normally you'd pull into port, every 30 days or so. But because Trump has entered into this war in Iran without a strategy, without really, I think, understanding any of the military dynamics, has a Secretary of Defense in Pete Hegseth who's fired really the expertise, the kind of top tier expertise that we had in the military, and is operating, as I sometimes say, as if he's in some Marvel comic book super soldier plan, as opposed to actually the strategy for implementing battle rhythms and operational movements. Seems to not really understand any of this. So we have a carrier at sea that hasn't pulled into port this year at all.
It's extraordinary. That is New Jersey's Governor Mikey Sherrill. She's a former naval officer expressing her outrage today of the Trump administration's blatant incompetence, inexperience, and indifference that has led to an extended deployment and horrific living conditions for United States service members in Donald Trump's seemingly endless war with Iran. Plans are finally in place for a new aircraft carrier to relieve the USS Lincoln after 9 months at sea. That is a modern-day record. Our colleague Priya Sridhar reports that the Trump administration's last-minute scramble still leaves uncertainty for the roughly 1,000 sailors on board the carrier group's 3 destroyer ships who have been at sea just as long. According to one sailor, the crew on those ships have, quote, endured shortages of food and supplies, plumbing failures, and equipment that broke down and proved difficult to repair at sea. Morale, the sailor said, is, quote, abysmal. Most of my command is just holding on by a thread. We have no other option but to just do our job till we can go home. I want to bring in our Pentagon reporter, Priya Sridhar, who's been breaking story after story on the Lincoln for us. She's also a former officer in the Navy. Director Brennan is still with us. I want to ask you something that might be sensitive, but now that this story is getting so much attention, are your sources increasingly afraid to tell you what's really happening?
Well, Nicole, they're definitely getting pushback from their chain of command who is telling them not to speak to the media. And I think they're also seeing a lot of the discourse on social media where, sadly, people are attacking service members and calling them weak. And we're seeing even some of the political appointees who are in charge of the military sort of spewing the same sort of rhetoric. So I think in some cases they were regretful at first for speaking to me because they were being slammed by some people on the internet. But now most of the sailors on the Lincoln are obviously happy about the outcome here because prior to all of this reporting, they really felt as though they were forgotten at sea. And that's essentially the case with these 3 destroyers, as you mentioned, who have been charged with protecting this carrier. They have been on this deployment for the same amount of time as the Lincoln, and they've been dealing with the exact same problems as a result of this deployment getting repeatedly extended because what was supposed to just be a few weeks mission with this war in Iran has now been extended on indefinitely. So while I have been talking to a lot of people surrounding these 3 destroyers, along with my colleague Lindsay Papia, the problem, Nicole, with trying to report on all of this is that each of the destroyers only has between 300 and 330 people. So they were very afraid to go on background with me because they thought that since it's a smaller group of people, perhaps they would be more easily identifiable. But at the same time, to watch the Lincoln potentially float away and get to come home and then to be left behind facing the exact same conditions has been so heartbreaking for them. And so that's ultimately what allowed us to get at least this one sailor to go on background with us, which is allowing us to talk about these destroyers, which I think we really should be talking about.
Director Brennan, I feel like we have a conversation pretty regularly about how broken the Congress is, that they are intended to be a co-equal branch of government, regardless of whether the president's party is in control or not. It certainly worked that way during the 8 years that that George W. Bush was president. Republicans were some of the loudest critics, John McCain among them, and many others of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But we don't often see the human consequence, right, of that breakdown. This young sailor jumping overboard and the kind of climate being carried out and the attention and the energy being on how that story got out, not on how to fix the suffering of the men and women of the military, is to me why those stories matter, and the human consequence of the Congress just leaving the playing field, of Republicans taking themselves off the game board and going home so that they don't make Donald Trump mad. You have men jumping off the USS Lincoln.
Absolutely, Nicole. And at a time when the White House and the executive branch is not doing a good job of even briefing the Congress, the reporting done by Priya and her colleagues is especially important because it's exposing the incompetence, the callousness, the recklessness of the Trump administration. And were it not for such reporting, these issues would go unaddressed. And so it's clear that this now is stimulating quite a bit of attention and hopefully some changes. But, every family member of every serviceman and woman should be outraged at what is happening to their sons and daughters, spouses, brothers, sisters, whomever, because what we've seen right now in the USS Lincoln, as well as those destroyers, is, again, it reflects the lack of planning, the lack of competent leadership, the lack of thoughtfulness in terms of what it is we're going to do as we're in what seems, as you said, like a never-ending war. And also the concern I have is Russia and China, Putin and Xi Jinping, are looking now at the United States military, seeing that a lot of our inventory of some of the advanced missile systems and weapon systems are being exhausted. But also, we can't run a war. We can't organize ourselves militarily in order to take care of the problem in the Persian Gulf. What might Xi Jinping and Putin be looking at and considering in terms of, is this a time, in fact, of weakness of the U.S. military because of a lack of leadership, because of a lack of competence on the part of senior leadership in the Pentagon, Hegseth and others? And so how might they take advantage of that to move in some way that's going to advance their national security interests and decrease ours?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important point, and it is taking away the one thing that they've had, right? They've been able to say, well, we might not have a strategy for winning, ending, or articulating our goals for the war in Iran, but the military is brilliant, and no one could deny that. And the men and women certainly are, but it's not being run brilliantly. And I wonder, Priya, what you make of how that lands inside the military.
Yeah, well, I want to also point out exactly why it is likely that not all three of these destroyers are going to be going home with the Lincoln, because I think this is a really important point. We know that the USS George Washington, the aircraft carrier that's homeported in Yokosuka, Japan, is moving towards the Middle East. But according to the U.S. Naval Institute, which tracks all of the Navy's 300 vessels, it's only moving with 2 destroyers and not 3. And here's the reason why, Nicole. That third destroyer, the USS Benfold, actually lost power in the South China Sea at the end of July, which resulted in the 300 sailors on board that vessel had no air conditioning, no toilets, no showers, no hot food for 4 days. And so that destroyer got redirected to the Philippines for maintenance and repair for an indefinite amount of time. And it's unclear at this point how long it's going to take to fix that destroyer and whether or not it will get reunited with the George Washington eventually. But that's the reason that likely one of these 3 destroyers that's with the Lincoln is going to have to stay there. And I think it goes back to the original point. These are not chess pieces. You can't just move things around. There is a domino effect here. It's not just impacting the sailors and the morale. It's all of our military assets, and we're wearing them into the ground. And, as was just pointed out, Beijing is watching all of this very closely, as is North Korea and Moscow.
An update to tell you about on a story we have been covering here at MS Now. The USS Abraham Lincoln, the aircraft carrier that has been for months launching missions in the Iran war and where sailors have been facing terrible conditions, is now heading home. Another carrier, the USS George Washington, took its place in the Middle East, and the Lincoln is making its way back to San Diego. Meanwhile, new reporting from MS Now finds that the straining of ships like the Lincoln has had quite a toll. Quote, after nearly 6 months in a fast-paced, unplanned war with Iran, the parts on board the Navy's aircraft carriers are at risk of wearing out. That includes the plumbing and air conditioning systems, catapults that launch fighter jets, and the gear that catches the planes slamming to a halt on the floating runway. The ships will then likely require extended maintenance to repair them. The Navy did not return requests for comments about delayed maintenance of those ships. want to bring in MS Now Pentagon reporter Priya Sridhar, who is bylined on that incredible story. She is also a former officer in the Navy. Tom and General Hertling are back with us. Priya, you have been covering the terrible conditions on the USS Lincoln. Talk about the significance for these families of this ship heading back to the U.S.
Yeah, Alicia, I think it's so important to take a moment to acknowledge that the USS Abraham Lincoln is finally heading back to San Diego. I don't think that's anything that these Lincoln families had anticipated, because in a meeting earlier this month with Navy leadership, they had actually told them to plan for a projected December 31st timeline. So it really feels as though these family members who decided to bravely speak up and share their concerns about their loved ones, the sailors and Marines who were on this ship, that resulted in public pressure and lawmakers demanding questions from the Pentagon. And I believe that's really what has prompted the Navy to now relieve this ship with the USS George Washington. But in addition to all of those questions that were raised as far as the morale, the exhaustion, the conditions as a result of this extended deployment, now many former senior Navy officials are telling me that they're worried about the wear and tear and the damage on these $22 billion aircraft carriers themselves. As you mentioned, typically these deployments are only supposed to be about 6 to 7 months long. But in this administration, we've been hitting new records, and these deployments have been anywhere from 9 to 12 months, which means the maintenance period in turn, which is only usually about 8 months, is now being extended out to a year and a half. And as a result of that, then the aircraft carriers that are out at sea, their deployments are being extended, and this cycle just keeps continuing. Typically, at any given time, out of the 11 aircraft carriers that the Navy has, only 3 to 4 of them are deployable. And already in this war in Iran, Alicia, we have used 3 different aircraft carriers: the USS Ford, which already went home, the Lincoln, which is going home now, the George H.W. Bush, which is still in theater in the Middle East, and now the George Washington, which is relieving the Lincoln. So we've basically used all of our deployable aircraft carriers on this one war, not to mention that we're leaving the Pacific theater uncovered by moving the Washington into the Middle East to relieve the Lincoln. So basically, if anything were to happen in any other part of the world, we're simply running out of ships at this point.
General Hertling, can you speak to that and the conversations that are likely happening behind closed doors about what is available to the president given the multiple conflicts we are now in?
Yeah, this is a fascinating story, and I continue to compliment Priya on the work she's doing. But we're now taking the story beyond the Lincoln, as Priya just said. The Lincoln is a visible symptom of something the military calls a force generation issue. The Navy can surge forces when there's an emergency. That's what militaries do in an emergency. But a surge is supposed to be temporary. If operational tempo becomes normal or goes outside the range of normal, you begin consuming future readiness to meet today's requirements. You know, I once had a Navy guy tell me that ships aren't rental cars. You don't bring one back, throw the keys to the caretaker, and then send it out again with the new customer. Every extra month deployed creates maintenance requirements that eventually have to be paid. And, you know, it's really interesting because the Washington, the USS George Washington, coming out of Japan, where they are home based, is focused on the Pacific. And that's the number one priority on not only the national security strategy, but the national defense strategy. So you leave that area uncovered, as Priya just said. And you have to remember, there are 11 aircraft carriers. Listen to me, an Army guy, saying all this. Tom's going to probably correct me. But a carrier strike group is part of a system. It's the carriers, it's the destroyers, it's the air wings, it's the helicopters, it's the weapons, the engines, the electronics, and thousands of sailors. So every additional steaming hour that these ships do consumes service life of all of those things, to include the people. And as we've taken it again, since Tom and I are so consumed with our wives, it affects the families much more than it affects the sailors.
Tom, I want you to augment all of the analysis that we just heard from General Hertling, but I just want to add in here, you talk to members of Congress and they will say, we don't feel we have full visibility into any of this. We don't feel we have full visibility into munition stockpiles. It's not clear to us whether the President of the United States knows the limitations that are now currently in place. Help me understand where this all fits together.
Well, if only there were something Congress could do about it as the Article 1 branch of government. What a mystery. And I think this ties back into something we were talking about in the first segment about trying to stomp on outlets like Stars and Stripes. One of the things you see from this administration in general, but this Defense Department in particular, is a kind of paranoia about anybody learning anything about what's going on inside the Pentagon or with our operations in the middle of a war. That is a huge change from the way the Pentagon used to operate. Go back to Reagan and Bush and George W. Bush and the wars we were fighting, Clinton and the operations in places like Somalia. Compared to this Pentagon, those administrations were paragons of transparency. They wanted buy-in from Congress. They wanted the American people to support these missions. This Pentagon, in particular, it's emblematic of everything that happens in this administration. The people that support us, our political partisans, and the people who support us, those are the real Americans. Everybody else is an enemy. They have to be kept outside. They have to be kept in the dark. Congress is absolutely shirking, and when I say Congress, I mean the Republican majority in Congress. It's absolutely shirking its responsibility to find out what the hell's going on out here. That's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. And I think it gets really exhausting to hear them just constantly shrug and say, well, gosh, we're just not getting enough information. Well, then demand it. You're Congress. That's what you're supposed to be doing.
Priya, I have less than 30 seconds left.
If I can, Alicia, I got to say this because Tom hits it right on the head. There's an Article 1 of our Constitution which deals with the Congress. Somewhere in that Article 1 is a line that says Congress builds and maintains an army and a navy. And maintains means that they have to check on the readiness rate of the Army and the Navy. They're not doing that. And it's infuriating to us seeing it on the outside because, the officers, the generals and flag officers, the admirals, they're doing what they're being told to do because that's what they're supposed to do. It's the Congress that should be stepping in right now and saying, hey, we build and maintain this force. What the hell are you guys doing to it over in the Department of Defense?
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee, Armed Services Committee. He's also a former U.S. Army Ranger. Congressman Crow, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Scott Bessent's statement today that we don't know when this war will end, open admission that he, in the inner circle of the Trump War Council, has no idea where we are in this war. What is your reaction to that?
We've known this from day one, that the administration, whether it's Pete Hegseth, Scott Bessent, Donald Trump, they all have no idea how to win this war and how to wind it down. They've had no strategy from day one. But I think the most important character or organization in this debate right now is actually, I think, the United States Congress, because the United States Congress has the power to end it. If people don't know when it ends, that's because Congress hasn't ended it. Right? The American people don't want this war, as you've pointed out, Lawrence. They absolutely don't want this war. On the right and on the left, people don't, which is why Donald Trump campaigned against endless conflict in the Middle East and said he was going to stop it, because he knew that's what Americans wanted. He, of course, gets into power. He wants to abuse his power for a lot of reasons, hide his corruption, to assert his authority. But why our framers put this in the Constitution, that the United States Congress is the body to make and declare and run wars, is because they knew that this power was too big, and the allure of corruption was too strong to put it in any one president or head of state. So today, Congress could go back to Washington, could vote to end this war, and if Donald Trump then ignores that vote, then we could vote to cut off the funding.
The aircraft carrier Lincoln is on its way home to San Diego, 5,000 crew aboard. They all have families. They all have friends. Those 5,000 sailors will be telling their stories of their experience, not sharing classified information, but certainly telling their families whether or not they had enough to eat and hot water and toothpaste and all these things that we're hearing about as a crisis issues on that aircraft carrier. So maybe tens of thousands of Americans, neighbors, friends, family members of those sailors will be hearing this. And when you go back to the 1960s, as we were considering earlier, when soldiers started coming back from Vietnam, when members of the Navy who were in service there came back, support for the war did not grow. Support for the war went down when family members, when friends, when people got to hear the stories directly from the mouths of the people who actually served there. That seems to be a possibility here.
Yeah, I do think it's a possibility. I've always said the best way to support our veterans is to make sure we're not creating more veterans with trauma, with combat wounds, with injuries, with mental health challenges, in endless, reckless wars. Let's just cut off the pipeline of things that we don't have to be doing. And, I'm no pacifist either. I'm willing to use the military if we absolutely need to do it to protect Americans and American interests. But it is very clear that has gone way off the rails in the last 20 years. The second thing is that the best way to support our military families is the same thing. Let's stop sending them on extended deployments, subjecting them to air raids, to drone strikes, to 9-month-long deployments at sea in the case of the Lincoln, which is almost twice as long as it was supposed to be on station, when that's not necessary and not in our interests. Because there's a big difference, Lawrence, between doing tough things in the military, which the military is designed to do. Right? I was a paratrooper. I was an Army Ranger. I went to war 3 times. And missions are tough. But we are trained to do tough things. That's different from doing something that's unnecessary and then not having the logistics, the supplies, the support to actually feed yourself, to sleep, to be safe, to have air defense, and have all the necessary things you need to then do the tough missions. And that's what's happening here. The incompetence of this administration is putting our service members in that position.
Congressman Jason Crow, thank you very much for joining our discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Here at home, we're seeing a record number of female military veterans coming out in force to run for Congress this election cycle. In total, 95 women from both parties are on the ballot across the country. That is a 137% increase from just 2 years ago. We want to bring in 2 of those female candidates running for office this year. Democratic candidate for Congress in Colorado, the retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Eileen Laubacher, and Democratic candidate for Congress in South Carolina, retired U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Nancy LaCour. Vice Admirals, it's nice to speak to both of you. I appreciate your joining us here on State of Play. Admiral Laubacher, we'll start with you. We were just talking about North Korea now firing missiles into the sea again today. Not the first time, but notably it comes just after the president told the U.S. military to scale back exercises with South Korea. He said he would have canceled them, but they were too near the date that they were supposed to happen. What message is this sending to Kim Jong-un?
Is short-sighted at best, and we can see from what's happening with North Korea this very morning that this is exactly the kind of problem with a government like North Korea. They are not. You can feel like you have a relationship with them, but this, at the end of the day, they are not our friends. They are not our allies. It is South Korea who has been, a faithful ally for so very many years. Really upsetting.
And then, Admiral LaCour, I just want to get your takeaway on that as well. Can you just give us your instant reaction to seeing this? It was striking to hear the president just a couple of days ago saying that he wanted to meet, in effect, with Kim Jong-un again, saying that the relationship is unthreatening and respectful. And because of that personal relationship, he was willing to scale back these exercises.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to have that sort of relationship at his level. I mean, that is kind of the best way to avoid miscalculations, to be able to de-escalate. But I think he gave away his leverage by scaling back the exercise prior to actually having that engagement and being able to have a reasonable conversation. And obviously, you can see the effect.
Admiral Laubacher, let me ask you, if I can, about what's been going on across the globe now in Iran. The USS George Washington just arrived in that region to relieve the USS Abraham Lincoln. MS Now was first to report about the issues we've witnessed aboard that aircraft carrier that had been at sea for a historic long deployment. Family members of troops on board reported terrible conditions, deteriorating mental health of those on board. MS Now reports that former Navy leaders are concerned that the war is wearing down the Navy's aircraft carriers broadly. What effect could these long deployments, the wear and tear, have on our military readiness, to say nothing of the fact that now there is not an aircraft carrier in the Pacific?
Yeah, I think that this is exactly the kind of challenge that we see right now, right? Is that this ill-conceived and unnecessary war is putting like significant strain on both our overarching readiness with regards to carrier availability, but also the strain on military members and their families when the Lincoln was deployed for so many months beyond its planned return. Our sailors are tough and resilient, and their families are dedicated and love our country. But when you're deployed, you measure time in milestones, and you measure time in holidays, and pushing that back and forth and extending people, it does wear on us, and it means a lot for our future recruitment and our retention of great sailors.
And Admiral LaCour, just to the point that I was making about the fact that there was no longer an aircraft carrier specifically in that region, in the Pacific region, because it was pulled to help support the mission taking place now closer to Iran. What message does that send to China, and what concerns does that raise for you?
Significant concerns. We have spent a lot of time over the past decade or so really focusing our efforts on the Pacific region for a reason. And this administration has chosen not to focus on an area, to create, an unnecessary war that is draining resources, putting attacks on our military families and our service members, and burning up all our munitions. And I think it is very short-sighted and concerning, and we will not be prepared for what may come in the Pacific region as a result.
Admiral LaCour, let me ask you, if I can, for a second. Senator Darlene Graham stumbled over a debate question this week. It was specifically about Taiwan and national security. Certainly you saw that. It got a lot of play on television because it was so awkward. She was even booed by some of those Republicans in the room. She said that national security is, in her words, not my thing, not my area of expertise. We should note she tried to clean that up on Fox last night. Here's what she said. Listen.
I tripped up on one question last night regarding Taiwan. But, I've said many times, I'm not a politician, certainly not a career politician. I don't speak politician. Of course, Taiwan is our friend, but I think people in South Carolina are more worried about making ends meet. They're concerned about boys and girls sports.
She obviously wanted to pivot to what has been a messaging tool for Republicans for a while now, the idea of transgender athletes, as opposed to the national security issues that she was pressed on in that event there. Admiral LaCour, to you specifically, you posted that national security is your thing. What is the risk, in your view, of lawmakers who lack an understanding and a real-life experience as it relates to it?
It's significant. I think you need to remember that as a congressional representative, you're absolutely representing the interest of your district. But Congress makes decisions about national security every day. And you need to have people in those seats who understand. And I'm not expecting everybody to come in with 35 years of military experience like I will be coming in. But you need to understand what is going on globally and what the United States' role should be in the global environment.
And as we hear about Admiral LaCour's expertise on this, Admiral Laubacher, to you as well, what does it say, do you think, about this moment that we're seeing so many female veterans, frankly, from both parties, like both of you as Democrats, are now running for office? What does that say about where we are as a country, and what does it say about this moment?
I think what it says for me personally is that this is not something that I ever intended to do, but I felt like we needed people in Congress who understood how to do hard things on behalf of our country, right? There is more than one aspect at play, and you have to be good at all things. You have to be willing to chew gum and ride a bike at the same time. And here we are. Should we be lowering costs for people? Absolutely. But should we be ensuring that our nation is secure and that we are making sure that we have people in power who understand the ramifications on individual and countrywide level in power? Yes, we absolutely should. It is why female veterans are running. It is why we are standing up and saying now is the time that we need people who understand the whole variety of those problems. How hard it is to balance a budget. I have 5 kids. Nancy has 6 kids. Like, how hard it is to do those things and how hard it is at the same time to make sure that our country's secure.
I've just got 2 kids. You have 11 between the 2 of you, so nothing but respect to you ladies there. Admiral LaCour, finally to you, if I may quickly. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has added you to what's called its Red to Blue program. You know this. That gives you more access to resources, obviously to money, to fundraising help. Democrats clearly hoping to flip your seat in a district that President Trump won by, I think it was 13 points 2 years ago. South Carolina is pretty red. Why is it winnable now?
It's winnable because of this administration, because every day you turn the TV on and you see the things that we've been talking about for the last several minutes. People see the damage that this administration is doing on the global stage. They feel it personally in their pockets, right, when they're, can't afford groceries and gas. And we are choosing to go into, a war of choice. And so that's why somebody with me, with my background in this district, which is about 20% military and veteran-connected families, we have a real shot at flipping this seat, and I'm proud to be the one in it right now.